Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Richard and welcome back to a Stock Market Outlook video sponsored by MarketSmith. I hope you guys are having a great start to your weekend, and as always in this video, we'll talk about the market indexes, the leading stocks, how my focus list performed this past week, sentiment from a few different sources, the IBD Big Picture article, and finally the GMI Signal from richardlmoglen.com. If you do enjoy my analysis, please go ahead and leave a like down below. It really does help me out and my channel. And of course, subscribe if you want to see more videos just like this one every single week. So starting in MarketSmith, looking at the indexes, looking at the NASDAQ composites, we're trending above a rising 21 and 50 SMA. Things look pretty good. And pretty much over the past 2-3 weeks, we've gone sideways pretty constructively on lower volume. And until things really break this higher low right here and break below the 21 EMA and that starts to trend down, I think things look pretty bullish at this point. However, going over to the S&P 500, one thing I don't like about this index is how we're kind of wedging up towards 4,500 on below average volume. I would like to see some type of shakeout pullback to 21 EMA. I think that would be very constructive, but overall, I can't argue with the trend here. We're above a rising 21 and 50 SMA and things look pretty good. However, in general, the S&P 500 and NASDAQ composite are kind of biased a little bit towards those larger cap names. And if we go over to the IWM, this is the Russell 2000 ETF, which is more small caps. And this shows kind of more of the action of growth stocks in general, where a lot of them are just kind of basing since this high in mid-March or so. So at this point, we're still below a rising or flattening 50 SMA, and we didn't have a great end to the week. You can see we ended at the low of the day on Friday. So I think really for growth stocks to really take off and start trending, I want to see us have a reversal through the 50 SMA, 21 EMA, and go up and try to challenge these all-time highs around 234.53. And looking at more of the small cap growth, IWO, this is very similar, also had a bad end to the week. The 200-day is catching up, so I really want to see some supportive action off that moving average next week. And I want to see us retake that 300 level right here and get above these pivots and then try to trend towards 315. I think that would be very bullish to see participation, not just from the larger caps, but also small caps taking control as well, and eventually break out of this flat base stage 2 consolidation. So those are a quick run through of the indexes. I also want to take a look at the FFTY, the Innovator IBD 50 ETF. Similar to the IWO, this is just kind of basing below 46. Nice upside reversal on Wednesday, and then 2 tight days to end out the week. Looks decent above a rising 21 and 50 SMA, but I do want to see us break to the upside of this tight range, or maybe have a shakeout to 21 and another kind of upside reversal to maybe start a move up through 46 and a challenge of eventually the 49.96 pivot. So that's run through market indexes. The other thing that I kind of use to judge market conditions is kind of subjective, but how have recent earnings been kind of received by the market. So if we take a look at UPST, this obviously was super bullish for this company. They put out amazing earnings, sales margins, great estimates for 2021. I'm just noticing here that the annual estimates for this year have been revised upwards from 750% to now 821%. And we'll see if 2022 gets revised upwards as well. But you can see very high volume on this gap up, great closing range right at the high of the day, and follow-on volume the next 2 days as well, breaking out of the stage 1 cup. So this is a good response, but we have seen some companies get beaten down, like Fiverr here, which is still kind of trapped below this high volume close. But we've seen some nice action on Friday from AB&B, bullish outside day after moving down on earnings. Also taking a look at Dash, this also had very similar action, but kind of lower quality names like Wish did get taken to the cleaners a little bit. So in general, earnings gap ups, I would say during the cycle have been pretty good, and they provide a lot of nice opportunities. We've got LC, Dexcom comes to mind, Melly also very strong. And in general, things have been pretty good and acting well from these earnings gap ups. Snap is another big one that I've been watching, just going sideways right at the pivot of the stage 2 consolidation after that strong earnings gap up. So in general, over the past few weeks or so, this market cycle, earnings gap ups have been received pretty well. And that is a positive thing because it means that the institutional risk appetite is still there, and we'll see how these growth stocks evolve from these setups. So with that, let's move on over to TC2000 and take a look at the potential market leadership. So sorting by that weekly change, let's go through each of these charts here quickly. UPSD, we talked about, great action. And if you want a really in-depth analysis of this stock, Ray and I just made an extensive video talking about the technicals, fundamentals of this company, and that'll be linked above right now. It should be popping up on your screen, and a link down below in the description. So definitely go ahead and check that out after this video. And we talk about the character of the stock, earnings gap ups, how to play those, and it's a really extensive technical analysis education. So with that, moving on, we've got Docs, another really nice recent earnings gap up, great action on this Wednesday, and then fall through on Thursday, and then an inside day to end out the week on this Friday, but acting great, nice volume as well, the highest volume since that IPO. LC also trending nicely above the 10-day, looks pretty good from this nice earnings gap up. FIGS, bullish outside day on this Friday, also an oops reversal through this low. And if you're wondering what an oops reversal is, once again, I have a video on that subject, which should be popping up right now and also linked in the description. It's definitely an excellent way to manage risk and often enter a lot of these high-performing stocks with very low risk. So that is FIGS, looks pretty good. Dash, as I mentioned, nice bullish outside day and also an oops reversal through this low on this Friday on nice volume. And we'll see if this falls through to the upside, breaks through 200, and tries to move up the right side towards all-time highs. DDOG as well, nice action after its earnings gap up. Basically a drift down, undercutting this low, but it didn't kind of live below that point. And we had a nice upside reversal and then a 2-2 reversal on this Thursday, and also confluence with the break of a DTL here. And we had nice action, fall through action on this Friday, making a new price high above this earnings gap up high. So it looks pretty good, and we'll see if this falls through to the upside or kind of consolidates for a few days and then continues to trend higher above the KMAs. Crocs also trending beautifully from this earnings gap up. And if you look at DDOG, Crocs looks pretty similar after it moved up through here. You can see this area right here. Crocs made a very similar U shape and now is just trending above that 10-day and rising 21 EMA. Looks pretty good. And Net as well reported earnings recently and had a decent reaction, oops reversal on this day, but so far is just kind of going sideways above the key moving averages. Olo also just going sideways above this pivot, and also a decent support bar on this Wednesday, and then fall through to the upside, then an inside day above the key moving averages to end out the week. Bill also nice upside reversal against the 21 EMA here, fall through on Thursday and Friday, and you can see it also pull back right to the prior pivot once again on this recent swing low. If you've missed a breakout, you think the stock's going to the moon, be patient, because often these stocks will let you back in on a pullback setup on this big upside reversal bar or on the recent pullback last week. Fiverr, as I mentioned, stuck below this earnings gap up, high volume close, or actually earnings gap down, high volume close. So until it manages to live above that and forms a structure, for me, this is just kind of basing and going nowhere. ZS trending nicely above the 21 EMA and showing a lot of RS versus other cybersecurity names like FTNT, which had a little bit of a pullback, although this is acting well and just continuing to trend above the 10-day, but more S is pulling back hard, and Crowd as well looks kind of weak here. These two bars don't give me a lot of confidence, breaking these lows on high volume and then faltering to the downside below this pivot as well. You do have a little bit of response Thursday and Friday, but it is on lower volume than this pretty bad bar on this Wednesday. Going back to the order, ZS looks pretty good, trending nicely above the 21 EMA. SC, you can see squatted a little bit on this Friday. It tried to break out above this high, but is holding that 10-day moving average. We'll see what happens on this breakout move starting on the 4th. Not enormous volume, but we did get some fall through on Thursday on volume, and it is holding that key 10-day moving average, which often after growth stock breaks out of a base, it just trends and trends above that 10-day until it forms that first natural reaction pullback. Tesla also looking pretty good. Nice bullish outside day here on the Thursday after tying up on below average volume, as you can see down here. And it did have a little bit of a downside reversal on this Friday, although not super high volume, although pretty close to the same volume as the previous day. But I want to see this hold above these highs and also above the 10-day moving average. ASAN also just trending above that 21 EMA. You can see it's found support here, here, and kind of in this area as well. Nice move on this Thursday, but just an inside day to end out the week on Friday. Team also progressing well from its earnings gap up, although this day didn't have fantastic daily closing range because it finished well off the highs here. It's still holding that 10-day moving average, and we'll see if it breaks above this high and starts to challenge this high right here from the earnings gap up day, or breaks kind of expectations and moves below 325. GNRC also going sideways above the 50 SMA, and you can see it had a big support bar here, but still stuck below this high volume close. CMG trending nicely above the key moving averages after a strong earnings gap up on very high volume. And remember, 1.4 million shares might not seem like that much for an earnings gap up, but you have to remember that this is a huge dollar volume stock because we're trading over $1,500 dollars per share at this point. So nice action, a good breakout from a short DTL as well on Thursday, and then some fall through on this Friday. GLBE also finding support right at this pivot, and the 21 EMA looks pretty good. AMD also moving above some tight price action after pulling back. I don't like how this pullback is on still high volume. Ideally, this would have been much lower than this breakout volume, but I like the action on Friday, an inside day and up, and that turned into a 3-bar break because it moved above this pivot right here at about 109.5. NVIDIA also moving out of an inside day and up off the 21 EMA looks decent. We'll see if this forms out a kind of VCP pattern and challenges this pivot and then all-time highs around 208. AMEH also pulling back to the 50 SMA here. I don't like the look of these bars right here where there's no real support and it's just breaking below these lows, but we'll see what happens. This has had a really strong prior uptrend, and so far it's pulled back about 35%, which is still pretty normal, but I do want to see some support come in off the key moving average. As we talked about, pretty volatile here. It's still above the 21 EMA, but you can see it's been pretty choppy, and this bar right here shows there's not yet a lot of demand that's basically sufficient enough to allow this to break out towards all-time highs and start trending above the key moving averages. It still has some work to do, and it looks like earnings aren't due until 9/8. So we'll see if this just chops around until that earnings report, that new information comes into the eyes of the market. Snap going sideways above this pivot. You can see it's still holding that 21 EMA, but has lost the anchored VWAP from this day right here and is below the 10-day moving average. But so far, not doing anything wrong. As I mentioned in previous videos, stocks can just move sideways, frustrate a lot of people, has some false breakouts before they really take off and go. If we use pins from last year as a precedent, we chopped basically sideways for a month and a half or so before ultimately this went on a nice run of 100%. So you just have to be patient and wait for the sellers to exhaust themselves before the stock is able to bounce higher and start to trend above those key moving averages. Shop right at the pivot at this moment. You do have a pretty bad downside reversal bar here and fall through 2 reversals to the downside on this Wednesday, but we are holding that 50 SMA, a nice inside day to end out the week on Friday. Domo above the 21 EMA looks pretty good here. DocuSign also a downside reversal and fall through to the downside the next day, but it is holding this pivot really nicely. And I do want to see some volume come in as it tries to break out of this inside day and up. But if it does lose the pivot, that would make me sell my position. My stop is right under this swing low at this point. SQ pulling back towards the 21 EMA, not the highest volume, but we'll see what happens if this can find some demand. And the standard pivot is at 282.99, but you could use an early entry off this inside day and potentially up setup early next week. FRHC also just kind of going nowhere, right above this pivot, forming a little bit of a flat base on top of this base right here. I don't like the look of this downside reversal bar right here, but it is holding above the 21 EMA and this prior pivot. This does move pretty quick when it gets going, both to the upside and the downside. Twilio pulling back against the 200-day SMA, but below all the shorter term key moving averages at this point. SPT, nice move through these pivots on this day right here, and then pretty much going sideways, holding the 10-day, although it does look like it will challenge it early next week. EMPH pulling back after kind of fading on this breakout here, and I don't think unless TAN really gets going and starts to show some form of U here and moves back towards this pivot, that EMPH will be able to take off. But if TAN does kind of turn things around and start to trend, EMPH would be the leader to focus on. Dexcom also holding up decently well after an earnings gap up. It did break this structure, this low here, but it is holding above the earnings gap up low and the 21 EMA. But these 2 days do give me a little bit of pause. There's not much support showing here, but we'll see what happens if we can 2-2 reversals to the upside and start to build out something and move back towards all-time highs. Moderna, not acting super great, holding above the 21 EMA, but these days show me that there's not a lot of demand remaining in the stock, and you do see pretty high volume on this drop of 15% in 1 day. So up here, there's a lot of emotional price action, and that's not really when we want to be involved in a stock like this. We want to be catching it as it breaks out of tightness, like back here against the pivot, or even here on a nice oops reversal, bullish outside day, which really starts this momentum run of 100% in less than a month. And up here is just a little bit too wide and loose. There's too many eyes focused on it. And this is really when you want to be selling into strength up at this point. And this absolutely could form up here and start to trend once again, but we'll see what happens if it stays above the 21 EMA. CrowdStrike, as I mentioned, I don't like the look of these two bars. There's not a lot of support showing here, and you do have pretty poor closing ranges breaking the pivot and expectations at this point. BNTX, similar to Moderna, not great action on this day and this day, and you have very high volume coming in on this day, the 11th. So this close to me is now very important. You can see we haven't closed below it, but we'll see what happens and if we manage to stay above this level at about 359.09. And lastly, we've got Roku, which just kind of leaked back towards the 200-day SMA and actually finished the week below that key moving average. And nothing really went right with the stock after this downside reversal. It did on that initial earnings report day show a lot of support here and finish with a strong closing range. But so far, we're not able to stay above this high volume close. So overall, that's a brief run through of potential market leadership. As always, let me know down below in the comments 1 or 2 stocks I should add to this list. And if you think one of these stocks doesn't deserve to be on this list, let me know that as well, and I'll take it off. And overall, we are seeing some stocks get hit with a little bit of distribution down here, but for the most part, stocks are acting well, and many are gapping up on earnings. So moving on to my focus list, let's talk through those charts as well. Sorting by that weekly change, SITM is another stock acting well after earnings. And last week, you can see it held this high volume close and actually moved through this high on this Tuesday right here and offer a nice entry point and is going quiet. In terms of price action, volume, I would like to see it dry up with this tight price action, but we'll see how this acts next week. DDOG as well, a nice U-turn as I discussed, looks pretty good. Snow is also acting pretty well. Nice move on this Thursday and fall through to the upside on Friday, ending the week pretty much at the highs. And it's trying to move up the right side of its institutional due diligence phase, just kind of riding that 10-day to higher prices. Melly also nice action after this earnings gap up, 2 tight days on below average volume, and then a really strong bar here on high volume. And then once again, forming a little bit of a flag here with an upside reversal on this Friday. Net, we talked about just pretty much going sideways. XP also had a strong earnings gap up, holding above this high volume close, but it looks like it needs a little bit of time. You can see a little bit of an expectation breaker. We had a 2-2 reversal through this high, but on this Friday, we did not end the week well. We had a downside reversal and actually a 3-bar, a bearish outside day to the downside. So this looks to me like it needs a little bit more time, and I'll be watching to see how it acts versus this high volume close. ZI as well pulled back into the 10-day moving average and offered a buy point here, an inside bar and up. And we'll see if it needs to go sideways a little bit before challenging this green line, or if it's ready to break out and challenge these all-time highs. Snap we discussed going sideways above that pivot. AMRK, nice tight action against the 21 EMA. I don't like this downside reversal on high volume, but so far it is holding this key moving average pretty well. DocuSign we talked about, SQ we covered as well. Coursera not acting great after this earnings gap up. You can see that we lost the high volume close, never really found any support at that level and didn't form a structure above it. And we've now lost this low of that day, which is significant. So I want to see us rally and move up above this level and back above the key moving averages. ON as well, after this earnings gap up, you can see had a nice move up, but now is pulling back into a flag. And I want to see volume basically drop off, as well as some tight price action to emerge. And definitely I want to see us hold this low right here at about 42.4. Dexcom, we discussed. Crowd, we talked about. Zoom, looks like it's just going to chop around before earnings on the 30th. And finally, we've got LRCX, which broke expectations on this bar on high volume and looks like it's going to just base for a while longer and potentially challenge this 200-day simple moving average. So overall, the top four was really were really the best options for this week for my watch list. And make sure you guys tune in tomorrow when I'll be posting my next list of ideas on this Sunday. So moving on to sentiment, we can see that we had a drop in bullishness on my Twitter surveys from 43.6% to now 39.6%. That's a good sign. But looking at the name exposure index, we're pretty much flat this week at 97. And this is pretty elevated, which does raise some caution signs for me. And look at the bulls versus bears poll. We're still just kind of trending here, but below 60. That's a good sign. And look at the put call ratio. We're still just basically going nowhere. So in terms of sentiment, the only thing that stands out to me is that the name exposure index is still pretty elevated. Moving on to the IBD Big Picture article, the headline is Stocks End Week with a Quiet Session, Snap, Tesla, and Buy Zones. Reading through to discuss the action of the indexes, the overall stock market trend. We've got some earnings reports coming up next week, and they've got charts of Snap as well as Tesla. And overall, their current outlook is a confirmed uptrend, and we've dropped to one distribution day on both indexes. I believe we now have 5 on the S&P 500 and 4 on the NASDAQ, and we've got some leaders up in volume and some down on volume as well. So moving on to the GMI Signal, this is still green since May 26, and the overall score on Friday was a 6 out of 6. So overall, taking everything into account, my current view, like IBD, is a confirmed uptrend. And I'll be watching those potential leaders to see how they act after this kind of tightness on low volume, whether we start to trend above KMAs or break expectations and key moving averages. That would raise caution signs for me. And I'll be watching to see if the IWM, the IWO can start to trend and move up within its base, move up the right-hand side. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new to the channel. I'll see you guys in future videos. Thanks.